The train was half empty that night, just the quiet hum of metal against rails and the occasional muffled cough from somewhere down the carriage. I sat by the window, watching the darkness flicker past, reflections of dim yellow lights from the stations smearing across the glass. Then he sat down across from me, a man in his late 40s, maybe early 50s. His suit was neat but slightly worn, his tie loosened as though the day's troubles had weighed too heavy on his shoulders. He had that look, not lost, but as if he had given up looking for something long ago. "Do you mind if I sit here?" he asked, voice deep and slow. I shook my head. "Go ahead." He gave a tight smile and settled in, placing a small leather-bound notebook on the table between us. I couldn't help but glance at it. The cover was worn, and the corners curled inward like it had been opened and closed 1,000 times. For a while, we sat in silence. The train rumbled on. The man ran a finger along the edges of the notebook, then exhaled sharply, as if making up his mind about something. "I used to believe that some secrets should never be told," he said suddenly. "Now, I think they should only be told to strangers." I turned my head slightly, intrigued, but unsure if he was actually talking to me. His gaze was fixed on the window, eyes unfocused, lost somewhere between the world outside and his own mind. "What kind of secrets?" I asked, more out of curiosity than anything else. He chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "The kind that haunt you, the kind that don't let you sleep at night, the kind you take to the grave unless you find someone who will carry them for you." I didn't reply. The air between us grew heavier. "I had a brother," he said after a long pause. "His name was Jason. He was a few years younger than me. Smart kid, full of life. We grew up in a small town in Illinois. Nothing special, just one of those places where everyone knows each other." His fingers tightened around the notebook. "One summer, when I was 16 and Jason was 14, we went to the old quarry outside town. Kids weren't supposed to go there, but we did. It was dangerous, full of deep water and sharp rocks, but it was our escape." He paused, as if reliving the moment. I remember the sunlight that day. It was blinding, bouncing off the surface of the still water. The air was thick with the smell of wet stone and warm earth. We were laughing, shoving each other playfully as we stood at the edge of the highest ledge. Jason was always the brave one. I nodded, though he wasn't looking at me. That day, it was just the two of us. Jason was daring, always pushing limits. He wanted to climb the highest ledge and jump. I told him not to, but he just laughed, said I worried too much. A muscle twitched in his jaw. He climbed up. I watched him stand there, arms spread, like a bird. He looked back at me, grinning. Then he jumped. I held my breath, feeling the weight of where this was going. But he didn't land in the water. His foot caught on something. The angle was wrong. I heard the crack before I even saw him hit the rocks. The train jolted slightly, but he didn't react. His eyes were far away. I climbed down. He was still alive. Barely. His eyes found mine, and he tried to speak, but blood filled his mouth before the words could come out. A pause. His knuckles were white as he gripped the notebook. I panicked. I ran. I swallowed. "You left him?" He gave a slow nod. I ran home, told my parents that Jason went missing. The whole town searched for him. Days later, they found his body in the quarry. They thought he fell in and drowned. No one questioned it. My stomach tightened. Why didn't you tell them the truth? He let out a shaky breath. Because I was scared. Because I was 16. Because I thought if they knew, they'd never look at me the same again. The weight of his confession settled between us like an unseen force, heavy and unrelenting. I used to dream about him, he murmured. In the beginning, every night, I would see him standing at the edge of the quarry, looking at me. His lips would move, but no sound came out. I'd wake up gasping for breath, drenched in sweat. The dreams faded over time, but they never truly left. He's always there, somewhere, just out of reach. The train slowed as it approached another station. The man ran his fingers along the notebook's spine, lost in his own past. Some nights, I still hear him, he whispered, when the world is quiet, when I'm alone. He exhaled deeply, rubbing his temples as if the act of confession itself drained the life from him. The train rumbled on, but the atmosphere between us was frozen in time. I wanted to go back, he continued. I did, but every second that passed made it harder. The longer I stayed away, the more impossible it became. By the time I convinced myself to turn back, it was too late. I studied his face. It was the face of a man who had carried a ghost on his shoulders for decades. You never told anyone? I asked quietly. Number, not even my parents. They grieved, they cried, and I sat there and let them believe a lie. I even let them comfort me, as if I had lost something too. But the truth was, I had thrown it away. The train slowed as it passed a station. The dim lights from the platform flickered over his face, briefly illuminating the deep lines around his eyes. And now? I asked. Why tell me? Why now? He tapped the notebook lightly. Because this book is the only place the truth exists, and I don't want it to die with me. What do you expect me to do with it? I asked, hesitating before my hand hovered over the worn leather cover. That's up to you, he said, a tired smile playing at his lips. Burn it. Read it. Leave it on this train for another stranger. It doesn't matter. But I had to tell someone, even if it's just a face I'll never see again. I turned the book over in my hands. The weight of it felt heavier than it should have. And what about you? I asked. You think telling me will make the guilt go away? He let out a dry chuckle. Number guilt never leaves. It just becomes something you live with. But at least now I won't be the only one who knows. I didn't know what to say to that. We sat in silence for what felt like forever. Outside, the night blurred past, station lights appearing and vanishing like ghosts in the dark. Finally, the train began to slow down again. Another station, another chance for him to disappear. This is my stop, he said, standing up and straightening his jacket. Good luck with whatever you decide to do. He turned without another word, stepping out into the dimly lit platform. The doors slid shut behind him. I watched him walk away, blending into the shadows until he was gone. I looked down at the notebook in my hands. I had no idea what I was supposed to do with it. I flipped through a few more pages. His handwriting varied. Some pages were neatly written, others frantic. Words scrawled over one another in restless desperation. A few pages had been ripped out, leaving jagged edges. Some entries were short, just a date and a few words. August 14th, 1993. I dreamed of Jason again. He was standing at the quarry, staring at me. I woke up sweating. December 2nd, 1997. I went back to the quarry today. It hasn't changed, but I swear, for a moment I heard his voice in the wind. One page in particular caught my eye. The ink was smeared, as if tears had fallen on it. March 5th, 2008. I saw a boy today who looked like him. Same messy blonde hair, same easy grin. For a second, I forgot he was gone. I almost called out his name. Then reality came crashing down on me again. I turned another page and found a longer entry. One that must have been written late at night, filled with second thoughts and regrets. I tried to tell someone once. It was years ago. I got drunk, sat across from a stranger at a bar, just like this train ride. I started talking, but my throat closed up. The words sat heavy on my tongue, refusing to come out. In the end, I just laughed it off, told him I was making up a ghost story. He believed me, and I let him. It was easier that way. I closed the notebook, my hands trembling. The weight of his pain was suffocating, as if it had seeped into the very pages. The train continued forward, carrying its passengers into the unknown. And yet, in my hands, I held something heavy, something real, one man's broken past. I sat there for a long time, my fingers resting on the notebook, the leather warm under my touch. The train rattled forward, and I could feel the weight of his story settling on me like a heavy coat. I was just a stranger, an accidental witness to his confession. Yet now, I carried it too. The man had left without looking back. I watched the door he had walked through, half expecting him to return, to reclaim his burden. But the carriage remained silent except for the hum of the tracks. I hesitated before finally flipping the notebook open. The first page was filled with a single sentence, written over and over again in shaky script. "I'm sorry, Jason." I turned the page. More words, fragmented thoughts, desperate confessions. Memories of their childhood, moments of laughter and innocence, twisted by the shadow of what had happened that day at the quarry. A name was scribbled at the bottom of one page. An address. A place in a town I had never heard of. The train slowed as it approached another station. I could get off, walk away, pretend I had never met the man. That would be easy, but something about the story had anchored itself to me. I thought about Jason, about the boy who never got to grow up, about a family that mourned a son they never really lost, only to lies and fear. Could I be the one to bring them the truth? I imagined knocking on a door, facing strangers who had grieved for decades. What would I say? Your son didn't drown. He died alone while his brother ran away. It was cruel. But wasn't the truth meant to set people free? Or would it only break them all over again? I sighed, pressing my forehead against the cool window pane. The train slowed to a stop. The doors slid open with a hiss. People shuffled in and out. I glanced down at the notebook again. The words blurred together under the dim overhead light. In that moment, I made a decision. I tucked the notebook into my bag and stepped off the train. Maybe I wouldn't go straight to that address. Maybe I wouldn't do anything at all. But I would carry it for now, just as the man had carried it for so long. And maybe, when the time was right, I would decide what to do with the truth. For now, it was enough to know that I held the weight of someone else's story, The train pulled away, disappearing into the distance, carrying its own secrets into the night. I walked through the station, feeling the notebook press against my side with every step. My thoughts churned. Could I ignore what I had learned? Could I move forward and pretend I had never heard his confession? I sat on a bench, pulling out my phone, fingers hovering over the search bar. I typed in the name of the town from the notebook. The first result was a small news article from decades ago. A boy named Jason, reported missing, later found drowned in the quarry. The obituary spoke of a tragic accident, of a young life taken too soon. I scrolled further, looking for anything that might tell me about his family. I found an address, the same one written at the bottom of the notebook. I exhaled slowly. Would they want to know? Would it destroy them? I sat there for what felt like hours, the decision hanging over me like a storm cloud. I read through the notebook again. There were so many details, their childhood adventures, inside jokes, late-night whispered conversations. The love between them was so evident, even in the pain. And then I reached the last page. If someone finds this, I hope you do what I never could. Tell them. Give them the truth I was too weak to face. My hands trembled. The man hadn't just given me a confession. He had given me a responsibility. I stood up, gripping the notebook tightly. My train of thought was no longer as unclear as it had been before. Maybe the truth would hurt, but it was his family's right to know. I turned toward the station exit. A long journey awaited me, but I was finally ready to take the first step.